Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to episode 14 of Futurism Forever podcast. Tonight we're going to be talking about Crash, the novel by J.G. Ballard, and also we're going to be getting into the movie version of it, directed by David Cronenberg. So I'm here with my panel right now is the other Carl and Domenico making his debut on Futurism Forever podcast.
Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, how's it going, guys?
Pretty good.
All right, cool.
It's going pretty well, other than the bike accident I had yesterday.
So you guys, what happened? Tell us about your bike accident.
Oh well, I was I was trying to go all the way to a different town, and what happened was when I was at this country store, there was a road that you have to turn to get to that town, and there was no bike lane on that road, so I thought that I could go to the gravel on the side of the road, just to have more distance between me and the cars, and my bike ended up just sinking into the gravel, since it was sloping, and it just flung me right off the bike where I got flung sideways, but otherwise I was okay.
Was this south of the border or in up here in Canada?
No, it's in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh shit! Okay.
Yeah. So you had a bit of a crash yourself recently. So
Yes.
you're in the right mind frame for Crash. So to start things off, I'm going to read chapter 1. It's probably going to take like 15 minutes to get through. It's about 10 pages long. Just to set the tone for people who have not read it before. So chapter 1 of Crash by J.G. Ballard. Vaughn died yesterday in his last car crash. During our friendship, he had rehearsed his death in many crashes, but this was his only true accident. Driven on a collision course towards the limousine of the film actress, his car jumped the rails of the London airport flyover and plunged through the roof of a bus filled with airline passengers, the crushed bodies of packaged tourists. like a hemorrhage of the sun, still lay across the vinyl seats when I pushed my way through the police engineers an hour later. Holding the arm of her chauffeur, the film actress Elizabeth Taylor, with whom Vaughn had dreamed of dying for so many months, stood alone under the revolving ambulance lights, and as I knelt over Vaughn's body, she placed a gloved hand to her throat. Could she see in Vaughn's posture the formula of the death which he had devised for her? During the last weeks of his life, Vaughn thought of nothing else but her death, a coronation of wounds he had staged with the devotion of an Earl Marshal. The walls of his apartment near the film studios at Shepperton were covered with the photographs he had taken through a zoom lens each morning as she left her hotel in London. From the pedestrian bridges above the westbound motorways, and from the roof of the multi-story car park at the studios. The magnified details of her knees and hands, of the inner surface of her thighs and the left apex of her mouth, I uneasily prepared for Vaughn on the copying machine in my office, handing him the packages of prints as if they were the installments of a death warrant. At his apartment, I watched him matching the details of her body with the photographs of grotesque wounds in a textbook of plastic surgery. In his vision of a car crash with the actress, Vaughn was obsessed by many wounds and impacts, by the dying chromium and collapsing bulkheads of their two cars meeting head-on in complex collisions, endlessly repeated in slow-motion films, by the identical wounds inflicted on their bodies, by the image of windshield glass frosting around her face as she broke its tinted surface like a death-born Aphrodite, by the compound fractures of their thighs impacted against their handbrake mountings, and above all by the wounds of their genitalia, her uterus pierced by the heraldic beak of the manufacturer's medallion, his semen emptying across the luminescent dials that registered forever the last temperature and fuel levels of the engine. It was only at these times, as he described his last crash to me, that Vaughn was calm. He talked of these wounds and collisions with the erotic tenderness of a long-separated lover. Searching through the photographs in his apartment, he half turned towards me, so that his heavy groin quieted me with its profile of an almost erect penis. He knew that as long as he provoked me with his own sex, which he used casually, as if he might discard it forever at any moment, I would never leave him. 10 days ago, as he stole my car from the garage of my apartment house, Vaughn hurtled up the concrete ramp, an ugly machine sprung from a trap. Yesterday his body lay under the police arc lights, at the foot of the flyover, veiled by a delicate lacework of blood. The broken postures of his legs and arms, the bloody geometry of his face, seemed to parody the photographs of crash injuries that covered the walls of his apartment. I looked down for the last time at his huge groin, engorged with blood. 20 yards away, illuminated by the revolving lamps, the actress hovered on the arm of her chauffeur. Vaughn had dreamed of dying at the moment of her orgasm. Before his death, Vaughn had taken part in many crashes. As I think of Vaughn, I see him in the stolen cars he drove and damaged, the surfaces of deformed metal and plastic that forever embraced him. 2 months earlier, I found him on the lower deck of the airport flyover after the first rehearsals of his own death. A taxi driver helped two shaken air hostesses from a small car into which Vaughn had collided as he lurched from the mouth of a concealed access road. As I ran across to Vaughn, I saw him through the fractured windshields of the white convertible he had taken from the car park of the Oceanic Terminal. His exhausted face with its scarred mouth was lit by broken rainbows. I pulled the dented passenger door from its frame. Vaughn sat on the glass-covered seat, studying his own posture with a complacent gaze. His hands, palms upward at his sides, were covered with blood from his injured kneecaps. He examined the vomit staining the lapels of his leather jacket and reached forward to touch the globes of semen clinging to his instrument binocle. I tried to lift him from the car, but his tight buttocks were clamped together as if they had seized while forcing his last drops of fluid from his seminal vesicles. On the seat beside him were the torn photographs of the film actress, which I had reproduced for him that morning at my office. Magnified section of lip and eyebrow, elbow and cleavage formed a broken mosaic. For Vaughn, the car crash and his own sexuality had made their final marriage. I remember him at night with nervous young women in the crushed rear compartments of abandoned cars and breaker yards, and their photographs in the postures of uneasy sex acts. Their tight faces and strained thighs were lit by his Polaroid flash, like startled survivors of a submarine disaster. These aspiring whores, whom Vaughn met in the all-night cafes and supermarkets of London Airport, were the first cousins of the patients illustrated in his surgical textbooks. During his studied courtship of injured women, Vaughn was obsessed with the buboes of gas bacillus infections by facial injuries and genital wounds. Through Vaughn, I discovered the true significance of the automobile crash, the meaning of whiplash injuries and rollover, the ecstasies of head-on collisions. Together, we visited the Road Research Laboratory 20 miles to the west of London and watched the calibrated vehicles crashing into the concrete target blocks. Later in his apartment, Vaughn screened slow-motion films of test collisions that he had photographed with his Cinecamera. Sitting in the darkness on the floor cushions, we watched the silent impacts flicker on the wall above our heads. The repeated sequences of crashed cars first calmed and then aroused me. Cruising alone on the motorway under the yellow glare of sodium lights, I thought of myself at the controls of these impacting vehicles. During the months that followed, Vaughn and I spent many hours driving along the express highways on the northern perimeter of the airport. On the calm summer evenings, these fast boulevards became a zone of nightmare collisions. Listening to the police broadcasts on Vaughn's radio, we moved from one accident. I lost my thing. We moved from one accident to the next. Often we stopped under arc lights that flared over the sites of major collisions, watching while firemen and police engineers worked with acetylene torches and lifting tackle to free unconscious wives trapped beside their dead husbands, or waited as a passing doctor fumbled with the dying man pinned below an inverted truck. Sometimes Vaughn was pulled back by the other spectators and fought for his cameras with the ambulance attendants. Above all, Vaughn waited for head-on collisions with the concrete pillars of the motorway overpasses, the melancholy conjunctions formed by a crushed vehicle, abandoned on the grass verge and the serene motion sculpture of the concrete. Once we were the first to reach the crashed car of an injured woman driver, a middle-aged cashier at the airport duty-free liquor store. She sat unsteadily in the crushed compartment, fragments of the tinted windshield set in her forehead like jewels. As a police car approached, its emergency beacon pulsing along the overhead motorway, Vaughn ran back for his camera and flash equipment. Taking off my tie, I searched helplessly for the woman's wounds. She stared at me without speaking and lay on her side across the seat. I watched the blood irrigate her white blouse. When Vaughn had taken the last of his pictures, he knelt down inside the car and held her face carefully in his hands, whispering into her ear. Together we helped to lift her onto the ambulance trolley. On our way to Vaughn's apartment, he recognized an airport whore waiting in the forecourt of a motorway restaurant, a part-time cinema usherette, for her worrying about her small son's defective hearing aid. As they sat behind me, she complained to Vaughn about my nervous driving, but he was watching her movements with an abstracted gaze, almost encouraging her to gesture with her hands and knees. On the deserted roof of a Northolt multi-story car park, I waited by the balustrade. In the rear seat of the car, Vaughn arranged her limbs in the posture of the dying cashier. His strong body, crouched across her in the reflected light of passing headlamps, assumed a series of stylized positions. Vaughn unfolded for me all his obsessions with the mysterious eroticism of wounds, the perverse logic of blood-soaked instrument panels, seatbelts smeared with excrement, sun visors lined with brain tissue. For Vaughn, each crashed car set off a tremor of excitement, in the complex geometries of a dented fender, in the unexpected variations of crushed radiator grills, in the grotesque overhang of an instrument panel forced onto the driver's crotch, as if in some calibrated act of machine fellatio. The intimate time and space of a single human being had been fossilized forever in this web of chromium knives and frosted glass. A week after the funeral of the woman's cashier, as we drove at night along the western perimeter of the airport, Vaughn swerved onto the verge and struck a large mongrel dog. The impact of its body, like a padded hammer, and the shower of glass as the animal was carried over the roof, convinced me that we were about to die in a crash. Vaughn never stopped. I watched him accelerate away, his scarred face held close to the punctured windshield, angrily brushing the beads of frosted glass from his cheeks. Already his acts of violence had become so random that I was no more than a captive spectator. Yet the next morning on the roof of the airport car park, where we abandoned the car, Vaughn calmly pointed out to me the deep dents in the bonnet and roof. He stared at an airliner filled with tourists lifting into the western sky, his sallow face puckering like a wistful child's. The long triangular grooves on a car had been formed within the death of an unknown creature, its vanished identity abstracted in terms of the geometry of this vehicle. How much more mysterious would be our own deaths, and those of the famous and powerful. Even the first death seemed timid compared with the others to which Vaughn took part, and with those imaginary deaths that filled his mind. Trying to exhaust himself, Vaughn devised a terrifying almanac of imaginary automobile disasters and insane wounds, the lungs of elderly men punctured by door handles, the chests of young women impaled by steering columns, the cheeks of handsome youths pierced by the chromium latches of quarter lights. For him, these wounds were the keys to a new sexuality born from a perverse technology. The images of these wounds hung in the gallery of his mind, like exhibits in the museum of a slaughterhouse. Thinking of Vaughn now, drowning in his own blood under the police arc lights, I remember the countless imaginary disasters he described as we cruised together along the airport expressways. He dreamed of ambassadorial limousines crashing into jackknifing butane tankers, of taxis filled with celebrating children colliding head-on below the bright display lights of deserted supermarkets. He dreamed of alienated brothers and sisters, by chance meeting each other on collision courses on the access roads of petrochemical plants, their unconscious incest made explicit in this colliding metal, and the hemorrhages of their brain tissue flowering beneath the aluminized compression chambers and reaction vessels. Vaughn devised the massive rear-end collisions of sworn enemies, hate deaths celebrated in the engine fuel burning in wayside ditches, paintwork boiling through the dull afternoon sunlight of provincial towns. He visualized the specialized crashes of escaping criminals, of off-duty hotel receptionists trapped between their steering wheels, and the laps of their lovers whom they were masturbating. He thought of the crashes of honeymoon couples, seated together after their impacts with the rear suspension units of runaway sugar tankers. He thought of the crashes of automobile stylists, the most abstract of all possible deaths, wounded in their cars with promiscuous laboratory technicians. Vaughn elaborated endless variations of these collisions, thinking first of a repetition of head-on collisions, a child molester and an overworked doctor reenacting their deaths first in head-on collision and then in rollover, the retired prostitute crashing into a concrete motorway parapet, her overweight body propelled through the fractured windshield, menopausal loins torn on the chromium bonnet mascot. Her blood would cross the overwhite concrete of the evening, embankment haunting forever the mind of a police mechanic who carried the pieces of her body in a yellow plastic shroud. Alternatively, Vaughn saw her hit by a reversing truck in a motorway fueling area, crushed against the near side door of her car as she bent down to loosen her right shoe, the contours of her body buried within the bloody mold of the door panel. He saw her hurtling through the rails of the flyover and dying as Vaughn himself would later die, plunging through the roof of an airline couch, its cargo of complacent destinations multiplied by the death of his myopic middle-aged woman. He saw her hit by a speeding taxi as she stepped out of her car to relieve herself in a wayside latrine. Her body whirled 100 feet away in a spray of urine and blood. I think now of the other crashes we visualized, absurd deaths of the wounded, maimed, and distraught. I think of the crashes of psychopaths, implausible accidents carried out with venom and self-disgust, vicious multiple collisions contrived in stolen cars on evening freeways among tired office workers. I think of the absurd crashes of neurasthenic housewives returning with their VD clinics, hitting parked cars in suburban high streets. I think of the crashes of excited schizophrenics colliding head-on into stalled laundry vans in one-way streets, of manic depressives crushed while making pointless U-turns on a motorway across roads, of luckless paranoids driving at full speed into the brick walls at the ends of known cul-de-sacs, of sadistic charge nurses decapitated and inverted crashes on complex interchanges, of lesbian supermarket manageresses burning to death in the collapsed frames of their midget cars before the stoical eyes of middle-aged firemen, of autistic children crushed in rear-end collisions, their eyes less wounded in death, of buses filled with mental defectives drowning together stoically in roadside industrial canals. Long before Vaughn died, I had begun to think of my own death. With whom would I die, and in what role? Psychopath, neurasthenic, absconding criminal? Vaughn dreamed endlessly of the deaths of the famous, inventing imaginary crashes for them, around the deaths of James Dean and Albert Camus, Jane Mansfield and John Kennedy. He had woven elaborate fantasies. His imagination was a target gallery of screen actresses, politicians, business tycoons, and television executives. Vaughn followed them everywhere with his camera, zoom lens, watching from the observation platform of the Oceanic Terminal at the airport, from hotel mezzanine balconies and studio car parks. For each of them, Vaughn devised an optimum auto death. Onassis and his wife would die in a recreation of the Dealey Plaza assassination. He saw Reagan in a complex rear-end collision, dying a stylized death that expressed Vaughn's obsession with Reagan's genital organs, like his obsession with the exquisite transits of the screen actress's pubis across the vinyl seat covers of hired limousines. After his last attempt to kill my wife, Catherine, I knew that Vaughn had retired finally into his own skull. In this overlit realm ruled by violence and technology, he was now driving forever at 100 miles an hour along an empty motorway, past deserted filling stations, on the edges of wide fields, waiting for a single oncoming car. In his mind, Vaughn saw the whole world dying in a simultaneous automobile disaster, millions of vehicles hurled together in a terminal congress of spurting loins and engine coolant. I remember my first minor collision in a deserted hotel car park. Disturbed by police patrol, we had forced ourselves through a hurried sex act. Reversing out of the park, I struck an unmarked tree. Catherine vomited over my seat. The pool of vomit, with its clots of blood like liquid rubies, as viscous and discreet as everything produced by Catherine, still contains for me the essence of the erotic delirium of the car crash, more exciting than her own rectal and vaginal mucus, as refined as the excrement of a fairy queen, or the minuscule globes of liquid that formed beside the bubbles of her contact lenses. In this magic pool, lifting from her throat like a rare discharge of fluid from the mouth of a remote and mysterious shrine, I saw my own reflection, a mirror of blood, semen, and vomit, distilled from a mouth whose contours only a few minutes before had drawn steadily against my penis. Now that Vaughn had died, we will leave with the others who gathered around him, like a crowd drawn to an injured cripple whose deformed postures reveal the secret formulas of their minds and lives. All of us who knew Vaughn accept the perverse eroticism of the car crash. As painful, sorry, I lost my spot again. Now that Vaughn has died, we will leave with the others who gathered around him, like a crowd drawn to an injured cripple whose deformed postures reveal the secret formulas of their minds and lives. All of us who knew Vaughn accept the perverse eroticism of the car crash, as painful as the drawing of an exposed organ through the aperture of the surgical wound. I have watched copulating couples moving along darkened freeways at night, men and women on the verge of orgasm, their cars speeding in a series of inviting trajectories towards the flashing headlamps of the oncoming traffic stream. Young men alone behind the wheels of their first cars, near wrecks picked up in scrap yards, masturbate as they move on worn tires to aimless destinations. After a near collision at a traffic intersection, semen jolts across a cracked speedometer dial. Later, the dried residues of that same semen are brushed by the lacquered hair of the first young woman, who lies across his lap with her mouth over his penis, one hand on the wheel hurtling the car through the darkness towards a multi-level interchange, the swerving brakes drawing the semen from him as he grazes the tailgate of an articulated truck loaded with colored television sets, his left hand vibrating her clitoris toward orgasm as the headlamps of the truck flare warningly in his rearview mirror. Later still, he watches as a friend takes a teenage girl in the rear seat. Greasy mechanics' hands expose her buttocks in the advertisement hoardings that hurl past them. The wet highways flash by the glare of headlamps and the scream of brake pads. The shaft of his penis glistens above the girl as he strikes the frayed plastic roof of the car, marking the yellow fabric with his smegma. The last ambulance had left. An hour earlier, the film actress had been steered toward her limousine. In the evening light, the white concrete of the collision corridor below the flyover resembled a secret airstrip from which mysterious machines would take off into a metallized sky. Vaughn's glass aeroplane flew somewhere above the heads of the bored spectators, moving back to their cars, above the tired policemen gathering together the crushed suitcases and handbags of the airline tourists. I thought of Vaughn's body, colder now, its rectal temperature following the same downward gradient as those of the other victims of the crash. Across the night air, these gradients fell like streamers from the office towers and apartment houses of the city, and from the warm mucosa of the film actress in her hotel suite. I drove back towards the airport. The lights along Western Avenue illuminated the speeding cars, moving together toward their celebration of wounds. All right, so that concludes chapter 1 of Crash.
Nice.
What did you guys think? Sorry, my reading wasn't a little smoother. It's been a long day.
No, don't worry about it.
I tried my best. It's hard to do in one take, but
Yeah, for sure.
I think people got the point. What's up, CSD?
Howdy, y'all. Am I coming in good?
Yeah,
we hear you.
So,
okay. I'm out in the middle of the woods right now.
Based. So, what did you guys think of chapter 1 of Crash?
Well, this just proves that J.G. Ballard has one of the best commands of the English language I've ever read, because we can think of it, Ballard is primarily known as a science fiction writer because he wrote his short stories at the beginning of his career in more like fantasy, sort of kind of like not real hard sci-fi, more slight, Twilight Zone-esque sci-fi. Whereas when he starts doing his atrocities, which is the second half of his career that starts with the atrocity exhibit and then goes into Crash, it's more science fiction of 5 minutes into the future, like humanity being impacted by technology. So he set himself apart as a sci-fi writer that wrote really damned well. And that's one thing the first chapter that just hammers home. I'm still wowed that he's able to sort of keep people enthralled with the way he writes, man. I'm so blown away.
Yeah, like, despite the fact that, like, his work is very, like, Crash in particular, is very grotesque and perverse. Yeah. It's very readable and, like, very well written. It's a joy to read. For me,
yeah,
anyway,
but even, I'm sorry?
Like, it's very very
Oh.
calculated. Like, he knows what he's doing as a writer. Like, it's well written.
Well, there is one critique, or one criticism that some people on YouTube have kind of alluded to. I don't really agree, which is basically this idea that Crash has the ability to be a little bit repetitive, and I see where they're coming from. Now, whether or not this points to people having low attention spans or just not getting it, but when I first read the book years ago, like a decade ago, that was my problem too. But when I reread it recently, about a few months ago, I realized that repetitive nature and it sort of ducktails, or goes hand in hand rather, with the fact that the book is told in the first person. And throughout the entire book, just the fact that Ballard, who's the main character, is called Ballard, he puts himself in his actual book. He starts constantly repeating sort of broken frosted windshields, bonnets, steering wheels. This kind of shows that Ballard knows how mania works. He knows how people who are becoming fetishists work. Their minds become obsessed and they constantly play out their fantasies in their brains time and time again. So just the fact that the entire book tends to have repetitive paragraphs, I think just shows not only is it a way deeper book, because the book is actually quite thin, but it just shows the utter genius of Ballard, and he knows how sexual manias work.
Yeah, I think the repetitiveness of like the content and the language used,
Yeah.
like it really like pushes you into the world he's creating, and like it helps like immerse you in the atmosphere. Like I would describe it as very atmospheric for a novel. Like
Okay.
um, it's there in the movie too, but like in the novel as well. Like it's very cinematic and like I don't know. You do get like visual images in your head.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, like normally for some authors, I tend to find it a little bit cringe when let's say there's an author describing something, right?
yeah,
Right now, I'm reading Ballard's more famous apocalypse books because the first half of his career, he wrote three major apocalypse novels: The Drowned World, The Drought, and The Crystal World. And normally, when he compares stuff, he'll say so and so was just like this thing. Like one great thing is in The Drowned World, he compares sunlight to a big golden beast. A lesser author would make that sound cringe, but in the words of Ballard, it just sounds cinematic and it just paints the image in your head, and you're like, oh yeah, this is good.
yeah, yeah. You're a lot more well read on Ballard than I am. I've
Mm.
read Crash and Empire of the Sun, which is
Oh, really?
nothing like Crash. Those are the only two Ballard books I've actually read. I've been meaning to get into more of his other works, but Crash
Well,
is
look,
just like very impressionable to me. Like it has piqued my interest about his other works. Empire of the Sun really does not set you up for what you're going to find in Crash.
oh, for
Um,
sure. But even that, if you just if you're interested in reading his short stories, they've all been published. You could either buy them as a volume one and volume two twin set, or a large 1,000-page volume. I actually prefer having them in two volumes. They're easier to carry, obviously. But
yeah,
I know there's a Netflix anthology show called I think it's called uh, Death, Love, and Robots. Yeah, it's a sci-fi anthology show, and in season two they took Ballard's short story, The Drowned Giant, which is one of his most famous, and they turned it into a 20-minute program, and it's fantastic. Yeah.
yeah. Like, do you know like how he developed in this way? Like, he started out making more like kind of standard fantasy
Oh, okay.
fiction.
Well, basically, to answer your question in a nutshell, you have to go back to the phases of Ballard's career. Wait, hold on. Excuse me. You have to go back to the phases in Ballard's career. Throughout his
Okay,
entire career, he was unique in the fact that he always wrote short stories. But behind that, the first chunk of his career, you could call that the apocalypse, the kind of like the apocalypse era of his career, when he wrote, as I said before, the Drowned World, the Crystal World, and the Drought. But what happened is his wife, I think, passed away of pneumonia in the late '60s, and that changed everything. He became not so much cynical, but he kind of went through a dark phase in his life. And what he would give us is a collection of short stories called the Atrocity Exhibit. Now, within that collection, there's a minor short story called Crash with an exclamation point. That would be the genesis of the book he would eventually expand upon, right?
yeah,
But the death of his wife kind of really brought to the fore his kind of, I won't say feelings of alienation, but rather feelings of how humanity, psychologically speaking, is being affected by the technology we make. In this case, cars. Later on in the last half of his career, he would sort of really delve into alienation, how people react being in gated communities, specifically the book Supercans, which I just finished, and David Cronenberg's son is in the process of adapting. Then he would look at shooters, as we see in the book Running Wild, and then he would look at the dawn of our new millennium in the book Millennium People. So what really started the genesis of him becoming kind of the more cynical edgelord of sci-fi would be The Death of His Wife and the book Atrocity Exhibit. Yeah.
Yeah. There's like a BBC documentary, I guess, of the Atrocity Exhibit. It's on YouTube, and like he covers a lot of the same ground that like goes on to be in Crash. I'm aware that he wrote that before Crash, and it kind of set the public up for, or his reading audience up for what Crash was going to be. And like,
well, mind you, I also think his upbringing in Shanghai really helped as well. Because like if you're a young kid living in an extremely gated community in a kind of second quasi third world country, which China was then, having your life be shattered. I even forget who actually said this, but one thing that was really impressionable for Ballard as a kid was seeing the world around him collapse. Showed that the world around him was kind of like a play, and the adults were kind of like acting out their role. And he felt that he was able to see kind of behind that really early on, and seeing how people act and being basically traumatized really young would eventually come to the fore later on. So I think that also impacted him.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely helps you understand like what founded his like worldview or whatever. That's what Empire of the Sun is about. And that's what like that was turned into a movie by Steven Spielberg as well. I don't think I've seen that one, but that is out there. You were saying something, CSD?
Believe it or not, this is the first time I've ever heard of this author.
Oh, yeah. Dude, you are missing out.
Yeah, he's a great writer. Not all of his works are like this. This is like his most infamous and his most relevant to futurism, I would say, because of the obsession with with automobiles and the way it shapes our life, and technology and violence. Like thematically, it's very in line with futurism, in my opinion. The fetishization of machinery and all that.
From what I got from it, because I came in late, it sounded like he was describing the alienation and isolation that people feel in modern technological society, but to its extreme.
Yeah.
If you're looking at themes of alienation in a modern technological society, the best Ballard book right now I could actually recommend is Supercans. I just finished it. It touches upon gated communities, and basically, if you ever heard the quote by Nietzsche that man loves danger and play, that sort of theme of us having very blunted lives and needing sort of violence and a kind of psychotic mania to feel something, that's a theme that runs through Supercans. So maybe you could find something in that book.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Like I said, Crash and Empire of the Sun are the only books by him I've read so far, but my interest is definitely peaked, and I plan on reading more in the near future. Maybe Supercans will be the next one. We'll see.
Oh, for sure, man. That if you're into the work by Borzoi and talking about alienation and how much we live in a very coddled, over-secure society, Supercans will be right up your alley.
Yeah, before we started, you were mentioning in Borzoi's book, Cultured Drugs, which I have not read yet. He talks about how Americans don't like have a sense of a future, and how like they really need to have one. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, look. I'm going to be honest. It's been at least a couple of months since I read it, but the one thing that really stuck out when Borzoi kind of, I won't say critiqued, but kind of had a melancholy outlook when it came to American quote-unquote futurism. America doesn't have it. And from what really stood out is the fact that, like, you have, like, American, let's call them patriotards, let's say. You know what I mean? They'll drink their Black Rifle coffee. They're going to have their big truck and all that. That's all nice. But when you think of it, you can't have a revolutionary third positionist movement but still constantly fall back on these old American tropes. It's going to sound old. It's going to feel old and stale, right? Like if we go back to the early 1900s and the rise of the Italian futurist movement, the rise of the Italian fascist movement, and many other nationalist movements, the ones that are still sort of the ones that still feel relevant today and still make people stand up and say, wow, look at that. Those are ones that were kind of a tad bit iconoclastic. Like they had the virtues of the past, i.e., the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, etc., but they embraced technology, speed, daring. They weren't scared to be new and fresh. Whereas down south in the United States, they still fall on these old tropes. It's like, guys, think of something new. And if you tell an American what's futurism, their first thing that comes to mind is like a Blade Runner dystopia, which is a little bit depressing because that shows you the psyche of these people. You know what I mean? So Borzoi's essay kind of has that feel to it, the sense that America doesn't have a real futurist, like you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I 100% agree with like Borzoi's thoughts as you described them. I'm gonna have to check that book out. I had no idea it covered that topic. Like that's definitely like what inspired me to start Futurism Forever. Like in the US. Go ahead.
The book reminds me a lot of Christopher Lash's book, A Culture of Narcissism.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Is it as good as everybody says?
Yes, it's really good. I encourage everyone to read it.
All right, because it's on my reading list. But sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot of good books that Lash has put out over the years before his death.
Yeah, I know there was an author called Sam Francis, that he kind of, like, he was writing at the same time Christopher Lash was writing, if my memory serves me correct. And I know he more or less kind of predicted the rise of the future alt-right. But I haven't read Sam Francis's book, so you can't really ask me.
Yeah, I haven't read Sam Francis either. But I do know, like, Lash was very big on the idea that if America was ever going to go into the right direction, it would be from a populist movement. And he always looked back to the older populist movements in America, like the old agrarian populist movements that took place back in the 1880s and 1890s, and also took influence from Sorrell.
Yes, exactly. I've been trying to get into Sorrell himself. But as I said, it's on the reading list on my Amazon. I'm going to get to it one day, hopefully.
Yeah. Oh, Sorrell's Reflections on Violence is available on YouTube for free, like audiobook if you're looking for that.
Yeah, I know, but like I'm kind of I'm going to sound like a massive big brain spurg here. I just like having the hardcover in front of me. I don't know. I'm just like that.
Yeah, I have a physical copy of it.
Oh, yeah, I get that.
I'm the same way too. Like it's not very futurist, but I need like I need an analog copy that in front of me to read. Like a PDF does not hold my attention, and neither does an audiobook. I need a real book. I need something.
Yeah, exactly. And even that, it's even a little bit of an ego thing, because like when people see the massive bookshelf that I have at home, it's kind of like, yeah, that's right. Look at those beauties. I know. It sounds cringe, but whatever.
Back on the topic of why Americans don't feel like they have a future, I think that's because a lot of them just lack any meaning in their lives, and they don't have strong communities or strong relationships around them, and that's part of the reason why they act like they had no future.
Well, no, I don't think it's no future. I think they lack any original symbol. That's what that's my thing, because every single symbol they have could easily become a symbol of like mockery and memes for people that can't stand them. You know what I mean? It's like they have Eagles and Lady Liberty and Lincoln and MLK, blah blah blah, but there's nothing like original they're going to create from the ground up. Basically do what the futurist movement in Italy did like 100 years ago, There's nothing new and fresh is what I'm basically aiming at.
Yeah, and see, that was a problem. It's because, like, in the United States, like, back in the 20s up to the 40s and 50s, they used to envision these futuristic ideas in designs and buildings and cars and all this stuff. And then, as a kid, I used to think that way, too. Like, we were going to see all this really cool stuff. And then here I am, in my mid-30s, just seeing that all we got is just video screens that we talk to each other on.
Yeah, but even that, like when it comes to like a futurist movement, the thing that made, well, okay, maybe Giovanni could help us out here. But the thing about the futurist movement is that they wanted to kind of like, from what I gather, break free from the old, moribund, tired past. Is that true?
Yeah, they wanted to create an Italy that exceeded the greatness of ancient Rome. You felt
Yeah.
like Italians were always looking backwards to ancient Rome or the Renaissance. They didn't have a sense. The same thing Borzoi is saying. Like they didn't have a vision of the future that they want, that they were going to actualize. Like they were too stuck in the past. So he was saying like, fuck all that shit. Let's do away with the past and like, build something that's even greater than what came before us. Encouraging people to be audacious and take risks and live dangerously. Romanticize like speed, youth, violence, and technology, and vitality, which he felt was sorely lacking in Italy in particular at that
Would
time.
you say China's doing that now, though?
For sure. 110%. I know I might come off right now as blowing too much smoke up China's ass, but you are not wrong. Because like the Chinese, on the one hand, look, I'm not a China expert, but I get the impression as an observer. I think they're trying to clean up their act because they have a demographic problem, and this week they more or less trying to legislate against quote unquote sissy men in their social media. So on the one hand, they have an old Confucian way of viewing the world because their brand of communism, which I think is basically fascism at this point, is basically on the one hand old school in the sense that they're very Confucian, but on another sense they're also very forward thinking because they want to resurrect the old Silk Road, i.e., the Belt and Road Initiative, and they're kind of acting like the way an ethnic group should be acting. They are very much a Han supremacist group. Let's call it what it is. And just the fact that like Americans don't know how to really deal with this is pretty telling, you know?
I saw they were also regulating internet usage, and like I'm not a China simp or anything. I'm very critical of like I'm not really critical of China what they do internally, but I don't see them as like a solution to our problems here in the West. Like we need something organic to counter or act as an antidote towards liberalism to liberate ourselves. I'm not looking to other powers to save us from ourselves. But they're regulating the internet too, and I fully condone in that. I think
no, they're actually
also
regulating
regulating
games.
Video games. Yeah, sorry, I said the internet. I think
and they're
kids today spend
billionaires.
spend entirely too much time in front of screens playing video games. They need to get outside more and live dangerously a little. Like scratch your knees, get into a fight. Like get a couple scars. Like live a little. It's good. It's good for you in the long run. Yeah, CSD's out in the woods. Like follow his example.
But the thing about sorry.
I was just going to say really quick, like even with me, when I just started playing basketball and just getting into sports, that just changed everything in my life.
Yeah, it's good to get out and be active,
No, but the thing about the Chinese is the fact that like they are not a weak people. That's the thing. It's like in the West we have this meme of this super nerdy Chinese spurg, but in China themselves, they actually historically come from a very warrior culture. It's like if you look at their archaeological digs, these people literally constructed these very intricate terracotta warriors. They had a warrior ethos about them. Same thing goes with the Japanese. Well, of course, we all know that. Same thing goes with the Koreans, Vietnamese, the Thai, etc. So I think this century we're going to see a slow sort of a reemergence of a more martial Asia.
Yeah.
And doesn't modern China have mandatory military service?
Yes.
Or is that just North Korea?
No. China. If I'm not mistaken, I think China does. But the devil is in the details there. Because I was told that I don't know. I'm not sure 100%, but they kind of bump up their numbers every year when a new crop of recruits goes in for basic training. So some of them do actual hardcore training, and the rest just like, clean the toilet, sweep the fields. So it's kind of like, take it with a grain of salt, but yes, they do have a sense that I think they do mandatory service.
Yeah, all the speed and innovation seems to be coming from over there right now. We're sorely needing that right now, which is why I'm trying to, in my own small way, trying to instill a sense of futurism in our own people with this podcast. Go ahead, Carl.
I was just going to say, because they speak on the futurism thing, I used to be, even a year ago, I used to be a very nostalgic person who always, longed for the past. And I don't feel that way no more. And I can see why it's important not to feel that way, because you can't recreate what's already been done. You can only step forward and create something new and innovative.
Yeah. I definitely went through my... I definitely went through my tradcath phase before I fully embraced futurism.
Yeah.
And when I dropped all that shit, it was like taking a weight off my shoulders. And I don't have any responsibility towards the past anymore, recreating something. The future is an empty canvas, and we can make it whatever we want of it if we have the audaciousness and the will to power to do so. As a collective right now, we really don't, but hopefully in a few years, Sorry, you were breaking up there. CSD?
Is something wrong with his microphone?
Yeah, he's out.
It's his connection.
Yeah, he's out in the woods. So
I'm out in the woods. Am I good now?
Yeah, you sound good now.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I was going to say, even if you go back to the past, you're going to eventually go back to the future, eventually.
Exactly. It's just going to loop around again,
Oh yes, I know exactly what you're alluding to now. Yeah. I forgot who actually said this. I think it was Mike Enoch, if I'm not mistaken. It's tip of my tongue, but anyway. The gist of what was said was, let's take conservatives, for example, American conservatives. They bitch and moan about something they don't like, but then they'll talk about, in the 1960s, MLK said this. Then they'll loop around, support what MLK said. Little do they know, they're going to eventually just end up supporting the one thing they originally hated. So yeah, they'll just go in a circle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you have to fix the foundational problems. Otherwise, you're going to end up with the same results. The definition of insanity is trying the same thing again and again and expecting different results.
Exactly.
You need fresh, new ideas. And, I think we've veered pretty far off topic, though.
Oh,
yes, we did.
Did we ever?
I was just going to say really
Crash.
quick. Yeah, I was just going to say really quick about Crash. Is the first chapter of the book the events in the book are so much different than the first part of the movie.
Yeah, there's I guess we can start with the movie now in Cronenberg.
I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it yet?
No, I haven't seen it. I assumed wrongly it would be on Netflix, but of course not. And I don't really feel like standing sitting in front of a small a laptop, so I love the book so much. I'm a little bit hesitant to even watch the movie. Is it good?
It's good. Cronenberg's one of my favorite filmmakers. But it starts with 3 back-to-back sex scenes, and Vaughn isn't introduced until later on. He's right there. The first word of the fucking book is Vaughn died yesterday in his last car crash. It starts out with Vaughn. He's introduced about I'd say a third into the movie. It's more about Ballard in the movie.
But is it faithful though?
Yeah, it's faithful, definitely. There's some scenes that are exactly the same as the book. That scene with his wife Catherine where they're talking about Vaughn. That scene. I don't want to describe it in too much detail, but there's also some homoeroticism going on. Ballard is kind of in a polyamorous, I guess, marriage.
Yeah, because him and Catherine, they're married, but Catherine, I know in the book she fools around with pilots, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's the opening scene. She's like banging some dude in like a flight hangar, and Ballard is banging some broad at at his work. He works in film, so like
Yes.
a film studio. Ballard is like a filmmaker in the movie, not a writer, or an
But hold on,
office worker like in the book.
yeah, but I'm gonna like jump forward a bit since I haven't seen Cronenberg's movie.
Okay.
I know in the book now there's a scene towards the end. I think it's the third or fourth last chapter, if I'm not mistaken. It's really at the end. That's when Vaughn starts to become increasingly unhinged, and it's explained that he starts picking away his scabs and scars, and he has bloody knees. He's going nuts at this point. And there's a scene that I was lucky enough, or rather smart enough, to read slowly to really take everything in which both Ballard and Vaughn are driving completely high on acid, and what's described is utterly fantastic. Is that in the movie itself?
Yeah, there's like a gay sex scene between Vaughn and Ballard, actually.
I wasn't alluding to that, but I'm actually alluding to the
I
part in
didn't
which he
get
kind
to
of
there
he kind of
yet.
hallucinates Ballard being full of
Yeah.
he kind of hallucinates Vaughn being covered in flies.
Yeah, there's no LSD scene, but like I brought that up because after that, that's when Vaughn starts to get unhinged and
Oh, okay.
starts trying to kill Ballard. It's actually Ballard who like drives his wife off the road in the
Oh,
end.
really?
Yeah, the chronology is a little different. I'd say most of the themes are the same, but yeah, there's no LSD or like drug use in the movie.
But
It
see,
just wasn't included.
that's the thing I don't get. The good thing is about like Ballard's work on average is the fact that the books are just slim enough that they're technically a movie producer's dream because you don't have to change much. You could just put the whole damn thing on screen. So why they would make a cosmetic change like Ballard driving into his wife is a little strange, but okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the movie already got an NC-17, so why not include like
Yeah.
drugs? I don't get why they'd leave that out, but yeah, that
Yeah, it makes
doesn't.
for a very striking imagery because it's right up Cronenberg's alley.
Yeah, I think it's the movie's unhinged enough as it is. I don't know. Maybe he thought it would just be like a little too over the top. Like the tone of the movie is like it's kind of a slow burner. It's like very moody and atmospheric. There isn't really a whole lot of dialogue. It's very visual and yeah, atmospheric. And yeah, like almost every scene is a sex scene. It never feels like pornographic or anything though. Like it's not trying to arouse the audience. It does propel the story forward. It is still like a narrative film.
Oh, okay, thanks. So is it more like eroticism in the sense of basic instinct? Like
yeah,
that feeling?
It is still like erotic. I would describe it as an erotic film. It's just not very like
it's not boorish, basically.
Yeah, it's not boorish. It's not lewd, depending on who you talk to. That scene with the girl with leg braces on when he has sex with her wound. I could see that bothering a lot of people. I could see the movie itself bothering a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, given the subject matter, it's as tasteful as it's gonna be.
Yeah. The only thing that freaked me out was like that metal thing that was in Ballard's leg after the crash because that looked like it'd be painful to have on.
Yeah, the leg brace.
But hold on, was there the character? Well, he's like I'd call him kind of like a tertiary character. He's the stunt driver. He's one of those main acolytes of Vaughn. They visit his home after a car derby. There's a scene in which he literally starts diddling his kid. I hope that's not in the movie.
No, I don't remember that
thank
being
God.
in the movie. He does
Yeah, I doubt it
recreate Jane Mansfield's car crash.
Okay.
And that's a pretty grotesque scene. And like Vaughn and Ballard roll up with like a camera and start filming it. It's like there's a lot of gore in that scene. and they're just like amazed by like how great like this crash is. It's a pretty disturbing scene. There's a dead dog in it, and the woman's like scalp gets ripped off, and
shit.
It's pretty brutal.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's not like, I wouldn't say it's over the top. It's not trying to be like gross out gore. It's not like 80s horror. Like it's just like, it's not Evil Dead or something is what I'm getting at.
Okay.
But it is disturbing, and I don't know. Certain audience members might like walk the fuck out of the theater at that point. I could definitely see. Apparently that did happen when it premiered at Cannes. Like a lot of critics left. Siskel and Ebert have a review of it where they're like fighting with each other, and like one of them liked it and the other hated it, and they did not see eye to eye at all on it.
When did this came out in 97 or something?
96 or 97, like mid 90s. Well, yeah, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite Cronenberg movies, but I'd say it is pretty true to the novel. There are differences, as there are with all book to movie transitions. Some things just work better in the written format, and they don't really translate to cinema.
Because as I mentioned before, like Ballard was able to get himself into the head of an actual sexual degenerate / maniac who's slowly developing this insane fetish. Like, seriously, car crashes and sex. But hey, Ballard makes it work, and he gets into that character. He literally inserts himself into the novel. So I think on that aspect, you can't really transcribe that into a movie unless you get like a sort of internal monologue, go complete David Lynch Dune, and that's just going to ruin the whole thing.
Yeah, it does kind of have that meta vibe to it because, Ballard is the creator, like the writer, and also the main character of the story. How much of this was like really true to his own life? I think it is like very fictionalized. I've never heard of him actually being into car crashes and all this crazy shit, but
I know that throughout huge chunks of his work in general, like, he does insert a little bit of his hobbies, like specifically flying. I know he was very fond of that. He was part of the RAF in Canada for a while, in I think like the 50s. And I know in Supercans, he loves writing about planes. And I know he loves driving Jaguars. That car constantly appears. So I would not be surprised. Okay, I'm not saying he was into sex with men or anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if he dropped, acid here or there when he was younger.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. I'd say like it's one of my favorite books, to be honest. It's not my favorite Cronenberg movie. That's got to be Videodrome.
Oh, really? How's that?
That's a great movie. I think like that deserves its own episode of Futurism Forever, to be honest. Like we have to get to that eventually. But great movie. It's very like body horror. It's got that classic line in it. Death to Videodrome, Long Live the New Flesh. It's a body horror classic. Kind of similar to Tetsuo the Iron Man, which we were talking about before the show started.
That's the movie that slipped my mind. Yes, exactly. Who was the guy who was supposed to come on and talk about that? Judas?
I don't think he's going to make it. We're an hour in now, and still hasn't. I'll check the chat quick and see if he said anything. But he said maybe, probably not. So I don't think he's going to make it on. He did write a very good thread on body horror as it relates to futurism on Twitter this week. I'll link to it in the comments after.
I think I saw that. I think you posted that up on Twitter, right?
Yeah, I reposted it. Yeah, he's like in our chat. He's Futurist Gang. So I try and support my friend's work. He's a great writer. Everyone should follow him on Twitter. Cronenberg is definitely like the guy of body horror in film. And there are like important Japanese figures too, and like important figures all over the place. But I'd say Cronenberg is like the most infamous. He's important. But yeah, Videodrome is one of my favorite movies. And yeah, everyone should read Judas's recent thread on body horror. I'll link to it in the comments after the videos.
All right.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to make it on, unfortunately. Hopefully, we can get him on some other time. So yeah, any like final thoughts on Crash, its relevance to futurism, or its relevance to the movement, who our audience is?
Well,
in general,
I think anybody who is into the type of stuff we're into, one, they will enjoy Crash. Even if I know some people tend to be a little bit more prudish, they'll hear, oh, eroticism and car crashes, maybe it's a little much. But when you think of it, cars are all around us. You have to appreciate an artist just as a work of art to create something that could easily become lewd, but it's a beautiful work of art. Just the fact that you have an artist that is able to get himself inside the head of an actual sexual maniac, just as art, I think is really fantastic. It's like the book is great. It engages in hyper reality because Vaughn is a complete sexual deviant. So just the fact that you see a man slowly transform over time with something that's essentially a made up fetish, I think is really cool. And on top of that, in general, if you look at Ballard's work, a lot of the stuff that I imagine bothers us about the modern world, Ballard was talking about years ago before he passed away in 2009. Specifically, alienation, living in gated communities, how technology affects us, how the car affects us. You know what I mean? Like this is a guy. He may not have been quote unquote our guy because politically he was what I call a proto boomer. He was born in the late 30s, had the same sacred cows like our parents' generation have, but he was that type of guy that wasn't scared to point out and say, "Hey guys, this thing is fucked up. How is this affecting humans on a psychological level?" So like that, I think people like us might really appreciate his work.
yeah, I agree with everything you said. I don't think I have like too much to add. I'd highly recommend reading Crash by Ballard. I need to get into more of his other works myself, but yeah, like even though it was written like it was published originally in like the 70s, I think.
Yeah, early 70s, and it was followed up
Yeah.
with High Rise, which that's a book I seriously recommend you read next. It was adapted as a movie starring Tom what's his name Hiddleston. He plays Loki in the Marvel franchise. Anyway,
Yeah.
High Rise is really good. It's like it's told in the typical third person. There's no first person narration. But if you ever if you're of the argument as I am that middle class people are more vicious to each other than lower class people are, you're going to enjoy High Rise.
Yeah. Yeah. That definitely sounds very interesting. I'll check it out. Crash still feels very relevant to our lives in the 2020s, though. Like cars still very much shape our lives, and they do. They are like transforming how we relate to the world, how we relate to each other. And you know, it is probably part of like our evolutionary process, and you know, it's going to continue to change us. Some might say for the better, others might say for the worst. I'm not gonna
Yeah, like
answer.
Kaczynski.
Yeah, we're a futurist channel, so like I don't know. We don't take the Kaczynski.
You don't think the Kaczynski pill?
No, I don't. I did when I was like in my early 20s, but I don't know. I
But
like
look,
technology. I think it can alleviate us of some of the mundane things we used to have to do
oh, for sure. Dude.
500 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, like well, in that sense, you're absolutely right. Like here's a fantastic. Oh, this is a little bit of a grug-brained example here, but here in Montreal, we love our festivals, we love our music. I was going to go see a popular techno DJ, but unfortunately, the venue was going to be social distance, so I decided to sell my tickets. The wonders of technology allowed me to sell this literally 2 minutes via my phone. My parents were floored. That's technology done well. Whereas degenerate shit like OnlyFans is technology done poorly.
Yeah.
So that I could see your object. I could see your objections to certain aspects for sure. But going back to Kaczynski really quick, I'm no expert on him, but I know he wrote that we're a little bit less free because roads exist. In a way, he's not wrong, because back in the day, you could walk from point A to point B through the woods. Granted, you knew where you were going. Whereas if you put a road through it, you automatically have this obstruction, and you got to go around.
Yeah, I remember that part. Like, you can pick your own route or like take whichever deviations you want to. Now with the roadways, it's clear set. Unless you have an off-road vehicle, like it's pretty much being dictated to you what you're going to see, which route you're going to go. There's very little you can do to alter the direction you're going. It's all like, you're like a rat in a maze or whatever. It's all planned out for you,
But here's another thing. I was talking to a buddy of mine, and we're talking about COVID, this, that, and the other. And I mentioned that on a previous TRS podcast. I forgot who mentioned it, but they mentioned about COVID, right? And how much certain liberals, even after getting their both vaccines, the 2 sets of vaccines, a lot of them are hesitant to take their masks off. They actually enjoy the fact that they get upcomies by wearing the mask, social distancing, and all that. Anybody who wants to get into the work by Ballard, right there, people sort of closing themselves off from the outside world is one of the themes of Ballard's work. Like, this pandemic is literally the most Baldarian shit I've ever experienced. I'm actually upset the man's dead, because if he was alive now, this would be his novels writ large.
Yeah, it feels like we're living in a dystopia.
Yeah.
With the mask, with the social distancing, especially during lockdowns when everything's closed, the streets are empty. It's kind of eerie and weird. I'm still not used to it, though. Like, the city I'm in isn't really on lockdown anymore. We still have to wear the masks. At restaurants, half the tables have like X's on them. You can't sit here. I don't know. I'm getting sick of it. I can't wait till this shit's over and we can just live normally again. But
no. But what I was alluding to Ballard is, like, one of the things he liked writing about is people openly trying to kind of like maroon themselves on their own island, quote unquote, on purpose. There's like the story of Robinson Crusoe. He gets marooned on this deserted island, and he's kind of actively trying to leave. Something that's very Baldarian, which is something that Ballard kind of brought to the fore, is this idea that people would get so fed up with the modern world, they would actively try to maroon themselves far away from everybody else. Like, he's written short stories in which people kind of like wall themselves into their own house. One of his most famous novels, Concrete Island, a man crashes onto, go figure, crash. He crashes his car onto a concrete island between 3 large interchanges, and eventually becomes content with his fate, and just is like, fuck it. This is my island now. Screw society.
Yeah.
That kind of reminds me of the rat utopia experiments, where some of the rats become either hypersexual or they become very like isolated, and they just start avoiding the other rats, and the population just would stop taking care of its young. Then eventually the colony ended up dying.
Dude, if you know about Rat Paradise, read Ballard's book High Rise. It's essentially Rat Paradise with people.
Wow, I should get into that one.
Dude, if you want to start off with Ballard, you could either read Crash or a High Rise if you're into the concept of people descending into barbarity.
Yeah, I gotta check out High Rise. You've intrigued me. I'm gonna have to check that one out soon.
Go for it.
Yeah, you sold me on it too.
Ha.
Yeah.
I do want to say though, really quick, is like with Cronenberg, my introduction to him was The Fly, the remake of
Oh
that
fuck, that's
movie.
good.
That's another great movie. He hasn't really made a whole lot of bad movies. Like his entire oeuvre is great. I like all his movies. He's probably my favorite filmmaker, to be honest. He's a Canadian too, so like
Yeah, he is. I forgot about that.
most of his movies are filmed in Toronto. Crash is filmed in Toronto, so like I recognize like a lot of the spots in that movie. It probably hits me in a special way for that
Yeah.
reason that other people are not going to pick up on. But yeah, he's a fellow Canadian.
Yeah, same thing with Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah.
So, have you seen his stuff?
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, he wrote. He directed Prisoners. He
Right.
did the sequel to Blade Runner. He's doing Dune right now, which is going to come out.
Yeah. He's a little more current and like relevant. Is Cronenberg even still making movies?
That's a good question. You're more of the Cronenberg fan than me, so
A history of violence. It's like not new anymore, but like I don't watch a lot of newer movies. I think he's made things since then.
Didn't he do Eastern Promise? No, he didn't. He do that movie?
Yeah, he did that after
Yeah.
A History of Violence. That was a good movie too.
That's with Viggo Mortensen, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was in he was in both of them. That one was about like the Russian gangsters.
Yes.
And Naomi Watts was in it, I think. It's been a while since I watched it, but yeah, it's a great movie too. Videodrome is my favorite one though. Like if you're gonna watch one Cronenberg movie, it has to be Videodrome.
Not The Fly?
Not The Fly. I prefer Videodrome with James Woods and Debbie Harry from Blondie.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Highly recommended.
Okay, man. I'll be looking into that.
All right, I think we're gonna wrap it up though. We've been going like an hour 15 minutes. I think we had a good discussion here.
Definitely.
Good intro to Ballard and Crash and car crashes. Yeah. On that note, live fast, die young. Die in an auto wreck. Salute.
Ha.